So hello everybody, this is Bhante Joe here, and I'm just here at a village kuti in Gampaha and thought to record a short Dhamma discussion for the internet. So I thought I could start with just a little bit of meditation, so I can lean forward a little bit and arch the spine and look about 3 feet in front and close our eyes. And can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right hand side, wishing may all beings to my right be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make the mind infinite, can make it unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond, in every dimension. May all beings to my right be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right hand side and our left hand side, wishing may all beings to my right and my left be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right hand side, our left hand side, and in front. May all beings to my right, my left, and in front be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right hand side, our left hand side, in front, behind, in all 4 directions. May all beings in all 4 directions be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right hand side, our left hand side, in front, behind, and above. May all beings in all 4 directions and above be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can spread thoughts of goodwill to our right hand side, our left hand side, in front, behind, above, below, all around in every direction, everywhere. May all beings all around in every direction, everywhere, be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And before we finish meditating, you can spend some time contemplating impermanence. Everything that arises is subject to ceasing. It's not me, it's not mine, and to cling to it is suffering. And can open our eyes and do a short Dhamma discussion for the internet. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, saṅghāṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, dutiyampi dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, dutiyampi saṅghāṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, tatiyampi dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, tatiyampi saṅghāṃ saranang gacchāmi. So hope that everybody's keeping well wherever it might be. And this is actually my second trying to record this video. The first one I recorded the whole Dhamma talk and the video actually shut off. So here we go. Hopefully this whole one records. So was asked a question a while ago by a fellow in Canada, and basically the question was, what's the difference between restraint and oppression? So on the one hand, as the way the word's usually used in the West, repression is a psychological term that refers to kind of like smashing a negative thought out of existence, just basically smashing it to the side, putting it aside, and forcefully not allowing it to arise. And what people usually do after that is they usually go and seek an additional external sensual pleasure to blot it out. So what you have then with repression is this situation where a negative thought comes into a person's mind, whatever the thought might be. It can often be associated, if it's a traumatic thought, with something really bad that happened in one's life. Usually people go through their lives with this idea of what life is going to be like, and kind of how things are going to happen, how they should happen. And then when something really, really negative happens that smashes this mental world that's been created, it can be traumatic. It's like reality has been shattered. And it's something that people remember for a long time, because after that, it's difficult for them to again go through the world thinking it's safe in the same way, or thinking they can create another reality, another mental picture of the world that's going to be like that again. So whatever traumatic event one may have experienced, what tends to happen is that event will come up in the mind. One won't want it to be there. One will want to forget that it's happened. One will want to smash it out of one's mind. And then what almost always happens in conjunction with this is that one looks for an external thing to blot it out to. So it's not just that this thought comes up in the mind, it's also that there's this external search for like something sensual or whatever it might be that will blot this thing out. Like somebody might indulge in eating, and this is how eating disorders develop. And somebody might indulge in drugs, and this is how drug addictions can develop. And there's different ways these things can develop, but this is one. One wants to use it to blot out a thought that one doesn't want to be there, or a memory that one doesn't want to be there. Now the tricky thing about repression, in the way that it's the psychological use of the word, the way that it's normally used in the West, is that it creates a kind of vicious or negative feedback loop. So what happens on the one hand is this negative thought comes up in one's mind, and one wants to smash it out of existence. So one is pushing it out forcefully and then setting up a guard. I don't want this to be there, right? The thing about this is that it takes energy. It takes mental energy to do this. Sometimes even takes physical energy. There's a physical effect in one's body trying to smash this thing out and keep it out. But one can only maintain this for so long. So when one's energy goes low, this thought comes back. Now, the second aspect of this is distracting it with a kind of external, with an external stimulus. And this distraction, what tends to happen is that at first, because of the novelty of whatever it is externally, it was kind of new thing, ice cream, then the thought will be blotted out. One will be totally distracted by this new thing, and one will forget about it for a period of time. But the more that one uses this external stimulus to distract, the less effective it becomes. So now you've got a situation where this thought's coming up more. One keeps trying to blot it out, smash it out of existence, but one doesn't have the energy. And it gets less, this blotting out gets less and less effective because there's other ways that the thought can arise. And also it arises when one is tired. And also the external stimulus gets less effective. So then what you have is a situation where people are trying to use an external stimulus that's not effective, and they use more and more of it. The thought gets more and more prevalent, and they become more and more afraid. And it can lead to a situation which one's mental space is a very unpleasant place to be. Another important aspect of this repression is that there's a fear that comes up when this thought comes into one's mind, because one doesn't want to think of the world in the terms that have arisen with this kind of mental event. There's external, one doesn't want to have this kind of mental event in one's mind where one's reality, one's belief in the safety of the world or whatever it was, has been upended. So, for example, one might have been mugged in a dark street corner and beaten up or something like this. After this, it's kind of very dangerous. One feels very afraid to go by any dark street corner, and one is always afraid. One doesn't want that kind of mental image. So this fear of one's world having fallen apart is one thing, and also the fear that this thought is even in the mind can arise. So it's kind of, this is here, get it out. This fear in and of itself can spiral up. The thought comes up, one gets afraid, one tries to blot it out, one tries to use external stimuluses, and yet it still comes back, one gets more afraid. One uses more external stimulus, tries to blot it out more. So it leads to this vicious cycle. It leads to this vicious cycle where the thought isn't being eliminated, it comes up more, and one's getting more and more afraid, and the means that one is using to try to distract are getting less and less effective. So it's something very negative. Now, on the other hand, the Buddha recommends restraint, restraining the thoughts, restraining the senses. And the way that one restrains in the Buddha's teachings is different. When a negative thought comes up, there's an appropriate antidote for it. So the Buddha has given many different topics to counter different antidotes. So, for example, if a thought comes up where one is filled with anger, the antidote is metta. There's also many other antidotes that one can use as well when one is filled with anger. It might be something one wants to apply equanimity to. It might be something one wants to investigate in terms of impermanence. In any event, there's appropriate counters that one can use. And there's different ways that one can use these counters, different ways that one can direct the mind, not just to that topic, but direct the mind in general to counter negative thoughts, to counter what we call kind of defilements, the kilesas. So there's a very famous sutta, there's a sutta anyway that's generally well known among many meditators, where the Buddha describes ways that one can direct the mind in the face of a negative thought. It's called the Vitakka Santana Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. And the most refined one, basically, you kind of take, you replace that negative thought with a positive one. And it kind of goes up. You can say, you can talk to yourself about how this is a negative thought, one should be embarrassed about it. And kind of learn to slow down that thought. And the Buddha describes almost as if there was a standing man looking at one sitting, or a sitting man looking at one lying down. And kind of learn to slow this thought down. And the last one is, if you still can't do any of these things, you basically, like a strong man would crush a weaker man, you crush that thought out of existence. So, in learning to crush the thought out of existence, or replace it with these other thoughts, or whatever it might be, it's a form of getting rid of the thought. It's a way to manage this thought. It's a way to manage the negative tendencies of the thought. One can also just look at the thought with equanimity. If you can't get rid of it, one can look at it with equanimity. The power of these things comes because the thought comes up, one gets afraid, and one reacts to it in this negative way. If one can remove the fear of the thought coming up, if one can replace it with more skillful thoughts, and what it does is it changes one's mental world. So even if one sets up this protection where one is smashing the thought out of existence, it's not the only tool one has. When one gets tired, that thought comes back, one can direct it, we can hit it with a more refined tool. And if the thought keeps finding ways to come back, one can view it with equanimity. One just doesn't have to react out of it. The thought can be there, but one can still go about doing the positive things in one's day. So this type of restraint is very different, because when the thought comes up, although one may smash it out of existence, one may use various means to counter it, or one may just watch it with equanimity. What one's essentially doing is one is not distracting from that thought. One isn't replacing it with an external stimulus that becomes less and less effective in an attempt to get rid of this thought, in an attempt to not have it in one's mind at all in such a way that one's distracted. What one's actually doing is one is countering this thought we might call mindfully, and one is doing it in a way that's aware. And what this means is that rather than one's mental space becoming something that one's not aware of, where all these negative things are happening in the mind, they're spiraling out of control, and one just doesn't want to know what's happening, one is managing one's mental space in a way that it becomes a better place to stay, in a way that becomes more beautiful. So these two approaches are kind of worlds apart, and the effects that one gets from these two approaches are worlds apart. In the one case, in repression, there's this negative spiral where the mind is spiraling out of control. In the other case, in the way that the Buddha has us manage these thoughts, restrain these thoughts, there's a huge variety of tools that one can use to replace or to counter this negative, this defiled mental state with one that's not defiled. Now, just jumping back to the point that we made about mental worlds, when something really negative happens in one's life, it's often something that one's mental world is affected by that. One's faith in the reality that one's built up is affected by that. So some of these tools that one might use, for example, if one was mugged in a dark alley, one may spread metta. One may look at these people with equanimity, but also one can learn to reflect that this is the nature of the body in and of itself. This body is subject to being stabbed, it's subject to being shot, it's subject to being broken. This is the nature of the body. You can't escape this. And although we may have a mental world that things should be this way, my life will proceed this way, oftentimes it doesn't work that way. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And this body is subject to growing old, it's subject to being broken apart, and it's subject to dying. Also, one may have these views about the various relationships in one's life. Actually, the Buddha's teachings is that these things are not stable, they're not under our control. You can apply the perception of impermanence to these things. For example, if there was a big trauma and one's spouse was not faithful to one. Well, this is something that can happen. One's spouses, various people are not under one's control. So essentially the Buddha's strategy, where a lot of these traumas, where a lot of this desire to repress and distract with external things comes from, is because one's life is reliant on external things for happiness. The more that one can manage one's mental world, the more that one can make it a good place to stay so that one is not reliant on external things, the more safe one becomes. And this is where restraint comes in. One restrains for the sake of not having one's mind go out and rely on things that are not stable. One restrains for the sake of turning the mind inwards to try to find happinesses that are more and more reliable. So in this way, the Buddhist path creates this virtuous cycle where our mental space becomes a better place to be, and the thoughts that might come in to disturb them, we learn to manage them better, and we're less afraid if they do arise. But ultimately, this virtuous cycle should spiral up so that we see the danger in these external things. We know that the reality that we build up around them is not safe and not stable. So we turn our minds to find something that's truly stable, that's truly safe. And this is the crux of the Buddhist teachings, why we restrain the mind, why it's different from repression. We restrain the mind to turn it inwards, to have it not rely on these things so we can find something that's really reliable. We can find something that's truly safe. We can find nibbana. So we restrain for this purpose. Okay, so I think leave that for reflection, and wishing everybody all the blessings of Dhamma practice.